The plan to expose someone usually comes from insecurity, not truth. It starts quietly, with whispers, assumptions, and exaggerated stories told to anyone willing to listen. The person being targeted often has no idea this little storm is forming behind their back. They're simply living, simply growing, simply healing. Meanwhile, the one trying to expose them builds an entire narrative based on what they hope is true, not what actually exists. But truth always walks differently. Truth shows up in silence, in consistency, in behavior. And when those around them finally see the reality of who was honest and who was projecting their own fear, the one who tried to expose ends up standing alone, embarrassed by the mess they created with their own hands. What makes this kind of embarrassment worse is the fact that the exposure never lands the way the instigator imagined. They pictured a dramatic reveal, a crowd gasping, their claims validated. Instead, people look confused. They start asking questions. They notice inconsistencies in the accuser's voice. They observe bitterness where confidence should be. And when the truth slowly begins surfacing, the accuser realizes their entire attempt has turned into a spotlight shining directly on their motives. Instead of exposing the target, they expose their own insecurity. Instead of gathering support, they gather doubt. Silence from the one they tried to ruin becomes louder than any defense. That silence forces everyone else to ask why only one voice is twisting the story while the other remains calm. In toxic environments, exposure attempts often begin with jealousy disguised as concern. A friend pretending to warn others. A lover pretending to protect their image. A coworker pretending to uphold standards. But beneath each attempt lies the same core emotion. Fear of being overshadowed by someone who does not need manipulation to be respected. The target simply lives with authenticity, and authenticity irritates those who built their identity on performance. When the instigator tries to expose them, they unknowingly reveal their own emotional bankruptcy. Others begin noticing that only one person is obsessed. Only one person is exaggerating. Only one person is trying too hard. True exposure doesn't require noise, but insecurity does. The person being targeted often feels the energy shift, even before the story reaches them. The sudden change in someone's eyes, the forced smile, the distance created without explanation. But instead of chasing clarity, they remain grounded. Growth teaches people to let truth defend itself. When someone attempts to expose a person who has worked on their mind, healed their wounds, and built themselves from the ashes of old pain, the exposure becomes a paradox. The accuser tries to reveal darkness that no longer exists. They try to exaggerate flaws that were already overcome years ago. Their narrative collapses because it does not match the present reality, and nothing humiliates an accuser more than realizing they are fighting a past version that no longer lives. The moment of shame arrives quietly. It doesn't arrive during arguments or confrontations. It arrives when the people listening start asking questions the accuser cannot answer. Questions about proof. Questions about consistency. Questions about timing. The accuser begins stumbling, contradicting themselves, revealing more than they intended. Meanwhile, the one they tried to expose moves with calm steps, not needing to justify anything. That calmness becomes the proof. That composure becomes the verdict. People eventually realize that the only person who looks guilty is the one who tried to paint someone else guilty. The accuser wanted attention, but attention becomes the thing that destroys their credibility. There is something almost poetic about watching someone dig their own grave while trying to bury someone else. The more desperate they become to expose, the more transparent their motives appear. Their tone sharpens. Their stories grow messy. Their obsession becomes visible. They accidentally reveal their fixation, their jealousy, their resentment. The target doesn't need to fight back, because life itself begins correcting the narrative. Observers start noticing patterns. Who speaks with honesty and who speaks with bitterness? Who lives consistently and who lives defensively? It becomes obvious that the attempt to expose came not from righteousness but from desperation. Once the truth settles, the accuser finds themselves isolated. The very people they tried to impress with their story now distance themselves, sensing the instability behind the accusations. No one wants to be close to someone willing to destroy another person just to feel powerful. The accuser becomes the example of everything they claim to fight against. and the target, they continue forward with their life, unaffected in the long run, because their worth was never defined by someone's attempt to distort it. The contrast between the two paths becomes so clear that observers no longer need explanations. Actions speak, patterns speak, silence speaks. The person who tried to expose eventually has to face the truth they worked so hard to avoid. The shame doesn't come from being proven wrong. It comes from realizing how transparent their intentions were. They meant to humiliate someone else, but ended up revealing their own emotional emptiness. They meant to weaken someone, but ended up strengthening them by accident. They meant to tarnish someone's name, but ended up damaging their own reputation. Exposure attempts rooted in insecurity always rotate like a boomerang, returning to the sender with twice the force. The one who was targeted learned something powerful through this experience. They learned that staying grounded is more effective than defending themselves. They learned that maturity outshines manipulation. They learned that silence reveals more than arguments ever could. And they learned that when someone tries to expose them, it is usually because that person fears being seen themselves. The attack becomes a reflection of the attacker, and that reflection is what ultimately breaks them. Real character moves differently when someone tries to stain it with falsehoods. Lies may cause temporary noise, but they cannot rewrite someone's foundation. Character is built through private battles, painful chapters, self-awareness, and the quiet work done when no one is watching. That kind of foundation doesn't crumble when rumors rise. It stands the way stone stands against wind. The one targeted by lies feels the sting, of course, but the sting never evolves into collapse. Instead, it sharpens perception, it redirects focus, it strengthens resolve. Meanwhile, the accuser expects a breakdown, expects chaos, expects a reaction dramatic enough to validate the lie. What they get instead is a silent refusal to bend. This quiet refusal becomes the first sign that truth has deeper roots than manipulation ever will. The lie begins fading the moment the person it aimed to destroy refuses to break in the way the accuser predicted. In toxic relationships, false narratives are often used to regain control. Someone who fears losing their influence tries to twist the story before the truth surfaces. They exaggerate flaws. They replace memories with one-sided interpretations. They speak loudly, hoping volume replaces evidence. But real character has a way of revealing itself through consistency. It shows up in how someone treats others even when no one is watching. It shows up in how they respond to pressure without turning cruel. It shows up in the way they maintain dignity long after heartbreak should have made them bitter. Lies can only survive when the truth remains hidden. Once people see the target acting with integrity, compassion, and calmness, the lie decays on its own. No fight required, no explanation needed. The accuser begins feeling the shift before anyone mentions it out loud. Their deception loses credibility because the person they attacked continues walking with a steadiness that cannot be faked. There's something powerful about watching someone remain grounded while others try to drag their name through the mud. Witnesses eventually recognize the contrast. One side is frantic, emotional, over-explaining. The other side is silent, composed, unbothered. That imbalance tells the story without a single confrontation. People naturally gravitate towards steadiness because steadiness signals truth. Lies create chaos inside the liar first. Their voice shakes. Their behavior grows inconsistent. Their bitterness rises. And in the process, their own character begins unraveling. Meanwhile, the person targeted continues, showing who they are through actions, not counterattacks. Real character has weight, not the weight that crushes, but the weight that anchors. It keeps someone from swaying under false accusations. It keeps their identity intact even when someone tries rewriting it. Over time, observers stop questioning the target and start questioning the motives of the instigator. False narratives always collapse when they press against someone who has done the inner work. A healed heart, a reflective mind, and a disciplined spirit cannot be destroyed by words made from insecurity. Instead, the lie exposes something else entirely, the desperation of the person who created it. It shows how much effort they put into covering their own guilt. It shows how threatened they were by the other person's growth. It shows how little responsibility they were willing to take for their own mistakes. Lies do not break someone who has confronted their own shadow honestly. Lies crumble against people who already peeled back their own darkness, processed their own flaws, and rebuilt themselves through truth. When someone knows who they are, accusations lose power. They become noise rather than identity. The most heartbreaking part is that the instigator rarely expects this outcome. They imagine the person collapsing under pressure, questioning themselves, retreating into silence. But real character creates a different reaction entirely. Instead of crumbling, the target becomes sharper. Instead of shutting down, they become observant. Instead of defending themselves desperately, they begin understanding who truly stands with them. Lies reveal relationships far faster than truth ever could. Suddenly, the ones who believed the lie quickly show their lack of loyalty, and the ones who trusted the target's character without needing proof become unmistakably clear. This clarity becomes a blessing disguised as betrayal. In trying to destroy the target, the accuser accidentally filters their circle for them. Character built through struggle becomes immune to character assassination. The target remembers the nights they cried alone, the days they questioned their worth, the storms they survived without any witness. Those struggles form a truth far stronger than someone's bitterness. When a liar enters the scene, it feels almost comedic compared to the internal battles the target has already fought. A lie cannot destroy someone who was nearly destroyed by life itself and still rose. The accuser miscalculates because they assume the target's strength was external. They assume it came from confidence or luck. They never understood that this strength came from pain turned into wisdom. Wisdom that doesn't bend when someone whispers a false narrative. What ultimately exposes the liar is how differently the two sides move. The liar grows restless, emotional, reactive. Their attempts escalate because they hope the lie would be enough to ruin the target effortlessly. But with each passing day, the target continues living with calm integrity. Integrity is something that cannot be performed. It must be lived repeatedly until the world recognizes it naturally. That quiet living becomes the downfall of the lie. People notice who continues showing kindness, who continues acting responsibly, who continues moving forward without speaking badly about anyone. The contrast becomes so undeniable that even those who initially believed the lie begin reconsidering. Real character silently rewrites the narrative. The accuser eventually finds themselves isolated in their own storyline. The people they tried to convince drift away. The manipulation loses its grip. The bitterness becomes obvious. Nothing looks more suspicious than someone who keeps explaining a story no one asked about. Meanwhile, nothing looks more genuine than someone who keeps building their life piece by piece without needing to prove anything. Real character speaks in results. The target's life becomes the evidence the lie cannot compete with. Success grows. Peace grows. Confidence grows. And with each step forward, the accuser realizes their attempt to expose someone else only exposed their own envy. Healing plays a role in this too. The target doesn't just survive the lie, they rise from it. They use the experience to understand people better, to build sharper instincts, to trust themselves more deeply. The lie becomes a catalyst for growth rather than destruction. Instead of collapsing, they become someone who navigates the world with more discernment. That psychological growth becomes the ultimate revenge, because the accuser wanted downfall. What they created instead was transformation. The target walks forward with an evolved identity. The accuser remains stuck, and shame becomes their shadow.